Your Excellency, Mr. Abdullah Hamar, Qatari Ambassador to Singapore, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen. What a joy to meet you all once again. Singapore and Qatar are very strong bilateral partners. It's my privilege time and again to do a knowledge management session. But this time it's going to be quite different. As my head of international banking has mentioned, we live in a changing world. Extraordinary set of changes and challenges in the last 2 months, which is redefining Qatar in substance and form. Today morning I was in Bloomberg as well as BBC. I don't know, many of you must have seen the interview. Some of the questions were truly interesting. The question started with a clear statement: Qatar is depleting its reserves. The country is losing the financial stability. How do you think, as a practicing banker, U.S. business model is changing? The second question was confined to the conclusion of the so-called blockade. The third question was towards terrorist financing. Is Qatar involved in the terrorist financing? I know I'm an economist and a banker, but I'm not a politician, but this question was put to me. It was also interesting to recognize, they asked me questions like, and the overall supply chain disruption when it cropped up on account of the blockade, air, sea, and road linkage were all scissored on 5th of June. What sort of a reorganization Qatar has embarked to redefine and make sure sustainable supply chain comes in. It was an interesting case study. In fact, Excellency Ambassador was mentioning that we should study this very interesting case study. Then I moved to BBC. It was much more political. He asked me whether the President of the United States made a mistake in making statements which are not good about Qatar on the terrorist financing. And again, Qatar's political progression, social progression, and economic progressions were some of the questions which were put across. And as you all know, Qatar's credibility lies in sustainable performance. Its sustainable journey and substantive compliance was the hallmark when Qatar borrowed money in international market in 1995-96, not put in flyovers or aerodromes or bridges. They went into education, creating a knowledge society. World-class educational institution was brought in. Having realized huge conserved resources in terms of natural gas, they started doing the hard work. And it's only payback which you are seeing in substance. The social progression, again, is of great substance. And political progression, if I have to adduce, whether it is United Nations Security Council presidency, United Nations General Assembly presidency, a country of a tiny form has really evolved to be a fine statesman. When it comes to economic sustenance, it's a public-private partnership model in real order. Qatar has got a huge conserved resources in terms of sovereign funds, over $340 billion. The financial media, which was showcasing, was picking up the central bank reserves of 40 billion plus cash. And when this blockade started on June 5th, there were some remittances up to $9.6 billion equivalent. And that was showcased as 1/3 of the Qatar reserves were drained. There's no substance into it. Let me come to the topic today. We have to recognize the world at large is going through an extraordinary set of changes and challenges. Let's start with the global economy for a while. Then we move into Qatar, and again, I'll showcase what exactly the sequence of events which has enriched Qatar as a self-reliant performer. Qatar emerging as a strong performer in the last 2 months. You have seen the way the governance have been redefined. You will find it mind-boggling. In terms of global economics, you have seen the reflection of politics and economics not converging, right from global growth. Even after 8 years of financial crisis, we are seeing global economy still at stake. 3.5% is the IMF projection predicated for this year. Advanced economies are grossly underperforming. 2% is aggregate growth of the advanced economies, which includes United States. United States is said to be propelling not more than 2.1%. We have seen stagnation in terms of convergence of politics and economics. The US news administration is moved from globalization to economic nationalization. Anti-globalization has been the new norm. World over, this is creating a new normal. Extraordinary set of deliberations taking place in terms of trade, investment, banking, and finance. United Kingdom, which was coasting over 2.5% prior to a Brexit referendum, is now said to be subsiding below 2%. 1.7% is the projection. When it comes to Euro, as a monetary policy is centralized, fiscal policy is decentralized, extraordinary set of changes happening in terms of convergence within the European fraternity. They are said to be doing not more than 1.7%. Japan, after the advent of Abenomics, is said to be coasting over 1%, 1.3% with the projected performance for 2017. So, en bloc, if you look at it, advanced economies still reeling under pressure. Emerging economies are the economic engine of the world. Incremental growth comes out of the emerging economies. Today, still, they are contributing significant portion of the global growth. China, over 30 years, gone are the days, over 30 years, over 9%, now it's said to be coasting 6.7, 6.8%. India, as a functional democracy, is redefining in form and substance, extraordinary set of market liberalization changes in the policy frameworks. Politics and economics is converging in substance, said to be doing not less than 7.1%. And you have seen a reflection of Russia. As good as yesterday, American Congress and Senate has voted additional sanction for Russia. They should be coming out of the contraction, but they should be doing not more than 1.2, 1.3%. Brazil is already under pressure. The president is subject to all sort of scrutiny, and Brazil economy is coming out of contraction, but not more than 0.3%. Yes, South Africa should be doing not more than 1%. If you look at the bigger picture, Middle East and North Africa and Afghanistan should be doing around 2.6%. This is the sum total of the global economics. If you look at the significant development when G7 has become G8, G8 has become G20, the decisions taken in G20 has not been executed still. The Millennium Development Goal has been redefined as a sustainable development agenda by the United Nations. Eradication of extreme poverty, gender equality, universal health care, universal education, again, global warming and climate change are all subject to new normal. America is pulling out of Trans-Pacific Partnership. You have a bigger risk in terms of trade. Extraordinary, to take for example, countries like Singapore, over 3 times of the GDP is trade. Last year, the aggregate growth of global trade is less than 1.6%, while the global trade, it used to be, prior to the financial crisis, double of the GDP. Look at the stagnation. Extraordinary set of challenges and changes taking place to bring in sustainability, to bring in human dignity and human prosperity. The Middle East, especially Gulf, trillions of dollars we used to have when the oil price was costing over $100, over 2 trillion was the GDP. The regression in the oil price on account of additional invention through shales, hydraulic fracturing, plus additional supply has changed the equations in terms of their gross domestic product. 1.3 trillion. Substantive portion comes from Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states. Within the Gulf definition, Qatar is $200 billion enterprise and economy. Extraordinary set of sustainable economics. You have seen the reflection over the years by borrowing money, as I said, in late 90s today, with a financial stability, has been setting new footprints world over as a sustainable performer. The economy within the public-private partnership definition has changed a lot. Transformation was the name of the game. It is the only country in terms of political refinement, built-in succession, built-in human rights, set in gross value to social welfare, ensuring knowledge society, building a knowledge society is ultimate. If somebody says this country is financing terrorism, it's a cause for concern. It's a cause for concern. You all know, you should know, again, financing is a structured discipline. United Nations Security Council endorsed clearly the list of individuals and institutions which are subject to such sanctions. These listed sanctions are measured and managed, controlled by global functional makeup in terms of banking. If Patriot Act has been predicated since 2001, September, extraordinary set of conditions have been set in to redefine the banking, money laundering, anti-money laundering, and combating financing terrorism has been set in with a new world order. Certain disciplines have to be practiced, otherwise dollar clearing will not be there. Correspondent banking relationship will not be there for financial institutions. Today, if you look in world order, whether it is IMF or World Bank, Qatar is the most de-risked country. Those who are confined to banking norms clearly see what sort of rating which was confined prior to this crisis. Extraordinary set of deliberations are going on in the world today. What exactly triggered this kind of conflicts? Let us see what exactly the story I have in store for you to see. Let me move on to the presentation, which is much more structured. I want to show a few video clips, and I also want to showcase why I'm here today, what sort of opportunities more than anything else. Qatar is getting purified. The dignity is getting lifted time and again with the kind of statesmanship it has demonstrated. At the same time, the purpose of calling the business community is to recognize that here is the opportunity, here is a country of substance. You all can collaborate and take it further by building bilateral partnership. That is the purpose of my mission today. Let's see the video clips, what I have in store. Global economics, we have seen Qatar economy, I mentioned in terms of economic fundamentals. Let's move on to...
Qatar is currently being blockaded by its neighbors. Its only land border with Saudi Arabia is shut down, and it can't bring anything or anyone in or out. It's also been blocked from using the airspace or ports of Saudi, UAE, Bahrain, and Egypt. Qatar's economy relies heavily on importing food, exporting oil and natural gas, and air travel. So what does this all mean, and how is it impacting the country? This is what things used to look like. Qatar used to bring $1 billion worth of food and raw materials by land through its only border with Saudi Arabia. Its biggest imports like cars and aircraft equipment would be dropped off by cargo ships to Dubai and Abu Dhabi before being shipped to its own ports. And its oil and gas shipments would head through these same two ports to get to its clients in Japan, South Korea, India, China, and the UAE as well. Its airline, Qatar Airways, is one of the biggest, and its airport connects flights heading all over the world. So what has changed? For one thing, it can't bring in food from Saudi Arabia anymore. leaving a shortage of basics like water, sugar, meat, and vegetables. It's now getting some of it from Jordan and relying on large food flights from Turkey and Iran. Qatar says it's looking as far as Brazil and Australia for regular food imports in the future. Its major exports have also taken a hit, with some international carriers refusing to send ships straight to its ports. Instead, it's now bypassing the boycott altogether and sending its oil and gas through ports in Oman. It's actually still sending natural gas to the UAE despite the blockade, which could sway the Emiratis into easing restrictions. Finally, with hundreds of daily flights to its neighboring countries now cancelled and restrictions imposed on where it can fly, Qatar is having to reroute all of its flights through Iran and Oman, making its flights to Africa, Europe and South America much longer. Qatar's finance minister says the country has enough money in the bank to survive this diplomatic crisis. But how long can it last?
How long it will last is a good question, isn't it? If you understand the underlying economics again. What is the bilateral trade between Qatar and Saudi Arabia? $525 million. What's the bilateral trade between Qatar and UAE? $2.6 billion, predominantly export of LNG from Qatar to UAE and Oman. What's the bilateral trade between Qatar and Egypt? $1.1 billion. That's not part of the GCC. What's the bilateral trade between Qatar and Bahrain? $125 million. What's the bilateral trade between Qatar and Japan? Over $30 billion. What's the bilateral trade between Korea and Qatar? Over $27 billion. What's the bilateral trade between India and Qatar? Over $10 billion. What's the bilateral trade between Singapore and Qatar? Over $4.5 billion. So it's insignificant. Look at the media. It's understandable. The social media has grossly misunderstood, misconceived the gravity of the issues. Even the rating agencies. Rating agencies has moved the rating from AA2 to AA3. Still, Qatar is a AA rated country. What does it mean in terms of the overall reflection in terms of borrowing costs? Slightly it's gone up. When we buy it as bankers, when we borrow money in international markets, it's marginally gone up for a while. And that's it. Beyond it, there's no substance to it. And there are clear reasons to believe long-term supply chain in terms of oil and gas. What Qatar does? Qatar does sell oil, gas and petrochemicals across the globe, whether it is Japan or South Korea or Singapore or India or China or Pakistan or London or Belgium. Around the world, it sells natural gas, oil and petrochemicals. Last year alone, 161 billion Qatar Riyal is the receipt from oil and gas. Mining and quarrying is 30%. 112 billion came out of investment revenues. And again, 61 billion came from other revenues. So if you look at the sustainable revenue stream, it is always there. Today, if we spend 10 billion on account of the exodus of remittance, and it has to be beefed up for the local liquidity, it's a small reflection of your capacity to spend. It's not significant. That's what we need to understand. But the story is misconceived. We need to recognize sustainable economics has been well-founded on account of the commodity-driven enterprise. And that's the reality. Let's move on to the next one. Let's listen to the finance minister.
First, it's a big economy. It's almost, we're talking about almost a $200 billion GDP of state of Qatar. We are very much well-diversified economy. If you look at our energy sector and where we stand on this, that's also has been, things are business as usual, so it's moving very well. If you look at where we stand in food securities and what things happening inside the country, I think you are now in Doha. You've been here for a few days, and you told me just before that you're going to spend another 3 or 4 days here. I'm more than happy to take another interview after 2 or 3 days that once you go and see the city, look at the banks, look at the grocery store, look at the business, go to the malls. We are business as usual, and we are open for business. We know that we might have 1 or 2 challenges here and there, but this is a country that's very resilient. We have the assets and the security that we need. Our foreign assets and our foreign investments is more than 250% of our GDP, so we are very much comfortable. We know we can defend the currency or we can defend the economy, but I don't think there is anything that we need to worry about in the local economy.
So no chance of a sell down in assets like Barclays or VW or Sainsbury's?
I always say we are extremely comfortable with our positions on our investment or actually in our liquidity in the systems.
And so no worries about then the reserves and how quickly those might be drained in supporting the currency?
If you look at what happened in the last week, I think there was some reaction on the market, which is very much understandable. I think if you take any action or any magnitude like this in any other countries, I think that's normal. We've seen some good rebound coming back. Other issues, especially the foods or the banking systems or doing business here, things are becoming up to a very much normal activities.
Let's talk bonds. We've seen bond yields jumping sharply. Is there any plan to step into the market there and buy bonds?
I don't think that we need to do anything like this. I think this is a lot to do with some nervousness in the international market of what's happening in the region. And I think if you look at where we stand on the rating agencies, we're still AA countries and we are one of the top 20 or 25 globally on our ratings. And honestly, we're much rated than most of the countries that they've started the embargo. So I think we are very much better than a lot of people around us.
So, that's true. If you look at the supply chain, it was a bigger challenge. When Saudi Arabia consignments were not getting into Qatar on a humanitarian ground, Iran supplied. Turkey, immediately, the ambassador was asking, it's a beautiful case study, isn't it? If you look at, within 2 days, the hypermarkets were completely back in track. There was no shortage of food. But the challenge was real. In terms of the overall sovereign funds, as the anchor was asking, the finance minister, we have liquid assets over $100 billion, which can be disposed any time. It can be put back into the local banking system. And you have recurring revenues, as I mentioned, substantial amount of LNG. Qatar is the second largest exporter of LNG. Third largest in terms of reserves, second largest in terms of the overall supply. The diversification and distribution strategy which Qatar has engaged in is quite unique, and it's cost effective as well. And that's what the message is all about. The banking system were subject to a bit of a stress. How it happened? The exchange rates, the forward for 6 months was put to test. The interbank rate, people always miscalculate. There were revision of interest rate on June 18th. Dollar interest was hiked by 25 basis points. And that was factored as well, where parity linked to dollar. And on account of which, the interbank rates was marginally up. It's back to normal now again. So when it comes to import, Qatar had trade surplus in June. So in real order, everything is getting back in normal. When it comes to capital market, it was a knee-jerk reaction. Now it's getting back in track to pre-crisis. And that is the reality. Let's go ahead again.
Another issue I know you all are keeping a very close eye on is Qatar. So I want to give you an update on that right now. Since the embargo was first enforced on June the 5th, the Secretary has had more than 20 phone calls and meetings with Gulf and other regional and international actors. The interactions have included 3 phone calls and 2 in-person meetings with the Foreign Minister of Saudi Arabia, 3 phone calls with the Foreign Minister of Qatar, and 3 calls with the Qatari Emir. Numerous other calls have taken place with the leaders of UAE, Oman, Kuwait, Bahrain, and others. Now that it's been more than 2 weeks since the embargo started, we are mystified that the Gulf states have not released to the public, nor to the Qataris, the details about the claims that they are making toward Qatar. The more the time goes by, the more doubt is raised about the actions taken by Saudi Arabia and the UAE. At this point, we are left with one simple question. Were the actions really about their concerns regarding Qatar's alleged support for terrorism, or were they about the long simmering grievances between and among the GCC countries? The Secretary is determined to remain engaged as we monitor the situation. He has been delivering the same message to other diplomats overseas. We are encouraging all sides to de-escalate tensions and engage in constructive dialogue. We once again call on all parties to focus on the core regional and international goal of fighting terrorism, to meet the commitments that were made in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and to constructively resolve this dispute.
That's interesting, isn't it? After 2 long weeks, there was no submission of demands. Why the blockade came? That's why. Is it on account of your prime allegation Qatar is financing terrorism or something else? GCC is known for cooperation and coordination for 40-odd years. Essentially, overnight, when it happened, without pre-warning, is it to do something with the allegations which you are aiming at, or you have substantive proof to showcase? What's the reality? That's the question America is asking. And clearly, the list of demands subsequently came. After this, Secretary of State's Rex Tillerson spoke, and after that, the spokesperson with the video clip which you saw, subsequently the list of demands were showcased. That was totally unrealistic. Let's move on. Now, I have to showcase for a minute the real reserves. I said, in real order, if you look at a diversity in terms of sovereign funds, 340 billion, multiple market, multiple sectors. For example, Singapore itself, we have real estate investments, and there were joint risk participation by Temasek as well as Qatar investment authorities. When it comes to UK, over $42 billion worth of investments, 35 billion pounds was invested in UK. Similarly, Germany. So the idea is to de-risk the sovereign fund itself in multiple sectors, multiple countries, so that money at short notice can be managed. And again, when it comes to diversity of risk, return also get justified in sustainable form. So when it comes to financial reserves, there's no real liquidity crisis. The loan-to-deposit ratio with the deflection of oil price because of the fiscal deficit. Mind you, Qatar now is embarking on a big modernization, urban development plan, 2022 infrastructure creation as well. There is a current account surplus, but a fiscal deficit of 7%. And that's what being funded. That's what the CNBC anchor also asked the finance minister is, are you going to borrow? With a AA rating, we can borrow. Do we need to borrow? Is a question. It remains to be seen, the alignment between fiscal policy and monetary policy. That's rightly measured and managed and controlled. Now, imports. Imports, if you look at majority of the food items are imported. You have a possibility of a food price inflation. That needs to be tempered, and that's need to be measured. Inflation is said to be around 2.6 to 2.7%. The June inflation has gone up by 0.8%, possibly. That needs to be mapped to see how they can bring down, or in case if there is requirement of additional subsidy to make sure that common man is not paying more. That's the development. Now, when it comes to interbank rates, I explained to you there's no real stretch. It's coming back to normalcy. And borrowing cost has been inflated to a large extent on account of the fear of international investors, but that's put to rest. Now they have seen the half-year results of all the banking systems. The central bank's balance sheet is showcased, and liquidity is very much visible. And money at short notice can be mobilized, and liquidity can come through sustainable revenue streams. Looking at the US dollar peg, His Excellency Ambassador was asking why the exchange rate, it was more of a speculation. We are parity linked to dollar, our standard rate is applicable. There were some odd elements where speculation was triggered. That's been put to rest again. The money supply was made abundant by the Central Bank of Qatar, and subsequently, in a week's time, after the crisis started, there was no confusion. Qatar has capacity to pay at least a year for import bills. It means there is no necessity for us to revalue the currency. There's no necessity for us to de-link from dollar. Our receipts are in petrodollars. And essentially, it is not advantageous with the kind of sustainable revenue stream which we foresee for years to come. These are long-term supply in terms of oil and gas and petrochemicals. As long as we are a commodity-driven economy, which is linked to dollar, and we have flow of financial stability, there's no need for us to de-link. Capital market, as I mentioned, it's back to the pre-crisis level. And that's how the movement is.
I had a chance to speak to yesterday with the CEO of the Doha Banking Group. And I asked him, given all the recent ratings downgrades we've had over the last few weeks, whether he saw major threats to Qatari's economic model. Let's take a listen to what he said.
Read the underlying statements by Moody's or other rating agencies. It has moved from AA2 to AA3. The AA rating is a worthy credit. The outlook has been put to negative. It means the borrowing cost for the sovereign or institutions may go up slightly. It doesn't imply anything beyond that. Conceptually, Qatar economy, as you rightly said, I did say in Geneva, in European Business School, Qatar economy is sustaining its credit. It's oil, gas, and petrochemicals. That's what we consign across the globe. And we have, if you look at the breakups last year, around 64 billion Qatar Real is the GDP on account of oil and gas. 112 billion is investment revenues, and 61 billion is other revenues. So effectively, 48% is oil and gas, 52% is non-oil. If you look at the economic momentum, it's 3.4% growth. Again, arguably largest in the Gulf. When it comes to hydrocarbon growth, it's going to be between 1.5% to 2%. Non-hydrocarbon is a driving force, 7 to 8%. So if you look at a bigger picture in terms of macroeconomics, you have net assets plus reserves, 2.5 times of the GDP. The central bank has got reserves over $35 billion. So economic sustenance is not a challenge. It is well built in, resilient. That's my point.
But macroeconomics isn't everything, is it? Because if this standoff continues, do you foresee threats on the horizon to that economic model?
Well, you have contingency management. Whether you run a corporate or a country, you have to map it. Plan A versus plan B is what everyone is engaged in. As a financial institutions, I have to look at options. As a country, alternate supply chain has been thought through when there is supply chain disruption. When it comes to other modeling, you have to measure, manage, and control it. That's what everyone is engaged in. That's what everyone is engaged in. If you look at steel used to come from Saudi Arabia. Now it's come from Malaysia. We used to have, which is Jebel Ali zone. That's a hub for transshipments. Now it's coming from Sohar, Oman. Oman High Commissioner is here. And again, we have enough reasons to believe we have to move from plan A to plan B. That's on the logistics side. And that's precisely well managed. Now, the Qatar port is 100% capacity. You have food security. That's where a bigger investment is going to come through. Food security is being managed. We used to have conserved resources, essentials, for more than a year. Now it's additional capacity being built for 3 years. It's possible. Multi-billion contract was awarded last week. So it's all coming up. Now Qatar learned to be self-reliant. It's an extraordinary case study for us to relish. Let's move on.
I also had a chance to sit down over the weekend with the central bank governor. He assured me about the Qatari Rial's peg to the US dollar. He said they had a huge amount of liquidity, and that was largely thanks to the more than $340 billion in reserves. That's cash and gold at the central bank, and then around $300 billion under management at the investment authority, the Sovereign Wealth Fund. I asked him what's been the role of the central bank during this crisis, and here's what he said.
We played a big role as Qatar Central Bank, and we find our banking sector is well capitalized, meeting the Basel III. They have high liquid asset, plus they are has a very good interbanking activity inside and outside. And they are very stable at this moment. So we don't believe that there is anything to worry about it at this moment. What I can say is that our environment proved to anybody that we are, first of all, solid, strong, and resilient against any kind of shocks.
Before this crisis, Moody's downgraded. Last month, S&P downgraded. Fitch placed you on credit watch. And then just a few days ago, Moody's said that they were downgrading your forecast for debt sustainability. Do you think any of those decisions by the rating agencies were justified, or do you not?
Well, let me say, before it's justified, but we can approve that for you. If you look at our financial sectors now, and also our debt side, which is almost the loan, I'll give you example now. Today, it's almost the 6 months over. So our result is just came out, the banking sectors. One, to approve to you that our profitability is higher than it was in the beginning of the year. Second, our loan to deposit, which was the concern for all these rating companies, it's going to be met by the end of the year to the 100%. I give you example. Maybe in the end of the 2016, we have seen the loan to deposit ratio is around 117, 118, and that's which make the Moody's and the rating company to worry. Today, we find out that the loan to deposit ratio is below 107 of the first 6 months. So we are heading to reach the 100% of loan to deposit by the end of this year. That will prove that we are really solid, strong, and we are able to meet our credibility in managing all the prudential side, financial stabilities, and our monetary policies.
That's Sheikh Abdullah bin Saud Al Thani, the central bank governor here in Qatar, talking about the resilience, the stability of the banking sector here.
You have to understand, when it comes to the loan to deposit ratio, when you have high capital adequacy, you substitute the liquidity along with the customer deposits. We have over 16% is the capital adequacy with Basel III compliance. That's what the governor was trying to articulate. In addition, liquidity can be arranged through money at short notice. You have investments which are liquid, which I mentioned, over $100 billion. So the real crisis is visible to you. It is not going to destabilize in terms of financial stability. That's the message. And subsequently...
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, and thank you for welcoming us to Doha today. And we also appreciated the time His Highness the Emir afforded us for a very good discussion upon our arrival as well. I am here in Qatar today carrying with me the same spirit which President Trump traveled in Riyadh with in May. The United States has one goal: drive terrorism off the face of the earth. The President said, and I quote, "Every country in the region has an absolute duty to ensure that terrorists find no sanctuary on their soil." The agreement in which we both have signed on behalf of our governments represents weeks of intensive discussions between experts and reinvigorates the spirit of the Riyadh summit. The memorandum lays out a series of steps the two countries will take over the coming months and years to interrupt and disable terror financing flows and intensify counterterrorism activities globally. The agreement includes milestones to ensure both countries are accountable to their commitments. Together, the United States and Qatar will do more to track down funding sources, will do more to collaborate and share information, and will do more to keep the region and our homeland safe. I applaud the leadership of His Highness the Emir of Qatar for being the first to respond to President Trump's challenge at the Riyadh summit to stop the funding of terrorism. And again, I want to thank His Excellency and His Highness the Emir for the time they have given us today. Thank you.
It's a very soothing statement in substance. If you look at the Qatar commitment to the overall alignment in line with the universal benchmarks for combating terrorism, it's always in the forefront. Qatar foreign policy is akin to a functional democracy, social justice, freedom, and human rights, as I mentioned. That's why they said in clear terms, Qatar's position is reasonable. Unless somebody has got substantive proof, they are interested in showcasing it. Now, next
Did Saudi Arabia and the UAE bite off more than they can chew by taking on Qatar? Well, David Hurst, the editor-in-chief of the Middle East Eye, thinks so. Why? The tiny oil-rich nation has a lot of money and powerful allies. The first team is led by Iran. Its allies include Iraq and Syria, Shia militias in Iraq, Hezbollah, and the Houthis in Yemen. The second is led by Gulf monarchies, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain, as well as Jordan and Egypt. The third bloc is led by Turkey, Qatar, and the Muslim Brotherhood. The Iranian-backed civil war in Syria brought the Saudi and Turkish blocs together. But the Qatari conflict has done the complete opposite by creating a potential common cause amongst Iran and Turkey. The Saudi bloc's short-sighted sanctions on Qatar include major miscalculations. First, they bought the Trump narrative. But when you purchase a Trump product, you buy a lot more. The CIA, Pentagon, State Department, senators, and judges aren't fans of Trump, an opposition strong enough to resist Gulf lobbying. Second, assuming that due to Qatar's size, no larger nation would come to its defense. Saudi and the UAE have significant investments in Turkey. Both thought that Turkey could be bought off, but that's not the case. President Erdogan realized that if Qatar was crushed, he would be the only man standing. Third, they revealed their real issues with Qatar. It has nothing to do with funding terrorism or cozying up to Iran. The UAE has booming relations with Iran, yet they're part of the coalition accusing Qatar of siding with Tehran. Their real demands, which were conveyed to the Emir of Kuwait, is the closure of Al Jazeera and defunding of other Qatari-affiliated media outlets. In other words, the Saudi bloc isn't content with censoring their own media. Instead, they want to shut down all media that reveals the inconvenient truth about their corrupt regimes. Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood have also been flagged by the Saudi bloc. This is where Israel comes in. The Israeli Prime Minister is quite right to think that he has the backing of the major Arab states in suppressing Palestinian independence. This has enabled Israel's siege on the Gaza Strip. But do the Saudi bloc have the same backing for the blockade on Qatar? Yes, but Qatar is not Gaza. It's got friends with big armies and a wealth fund of $335 billion. It's the largest producer of natural gas in the Middle East. The Saudis and Emiratis are not the only players in Washington, and even Gaza has survived its siege.
That's interesting, isn't it? So it's very intricate to interpret, but the bigger picture is That's interesting, isn't it? They import cows and make sure that you are not running short of milk. And it's going to be scaled up, mind you. The government has taken an extraordinary decision to support this mission, and it's going to be...
From another quarter, arguably event...
I'm skipping this. Now, just to conclude, this is what Qatar stands in high dignity. They never yet retaliated into any of the actions taken by the neighbors, siege countries we call them. And they maintain their composure. And after a month, His Highness Emir has given a commitment that is overall commitment to universal benchmarks, human dignity, human prosperity is what he keeps in mind. He is committed to the framework of sustainable development agenda for the global growth, and he will combat the negative forces as set in by the global leader functional makeups. So that's the real statesmanship, not to retaliate in emotions, but to ensure you behave sensibly. That has lifted a vision around the world. Qatar is a country of unique substance. Let me move on to a few points which are vital now. Now, opportunities, that's very important. Some of the business friends are here. I've been coming here over the years, over 10 years now, and showcasing the opportunities in Qatar. With the changing dynamics, Qatar is a real opportunity. In terms of fiscal policy, you have over 88 billion Qatar Riyal worth of infrastructure creations. Healthcare, 24.4 billion Qatar Riyal. Education, 24 billion. And again, road, rail, airport, seaport, infrastructure creation. In terms of modernization, you have 44 billion, or 88 billion is going to be the expenditure, and a lot of Singaporean companies over the years, right from Keppel to other companies, they're all marching ahead. Small and medium-sized entrepreneurs are coming in. Doha Bank is always there. We're the first Qatari bank to be here, and along with this, now Qatar National Bank is also committed to support the bilateral mission. So we have opportunities in terms of fiscal side. Government reforms have been now well received. We have public-private partnership law. We have arbitration law, which has been pronounced. We have economic free zones have been of highest order. You have single window clearance. And you also, as I mentioned, food security. We import from Singapore telecommunications, electronic equipments, and again, we export in terms of the crude oil and get it refined. This is a hub for Qatar in real transshipment. And we also have opportunity to work with more and more EPC companies from Singapore. We look forward to see that we, time and again, support the mission of Singaporean business community. Singapore is a model economy again. The growth has been really prolific, $300 billion GDP, over 2.2 billion average growth this year and possibly more next year. Inflation is under control, 1.2%. And you have a current account surplus, nearly 58 billion. That's nearly 20% of your, as a percentage of GDP, the current account surplus. That shows clearly the financial stability. And again, your bond market has moved very well this year. Your stock market is up year-to-date 15%. The overall, the bilateral relationship is in the ascending trend, and the Qatar mission is a window for you to work with and make sure that we grow our relationship for months and years to come. And there are bigger opportunities we foresee. And that's precisely the essence of today's submission. I thank one and all for your presence here. And if you have any questions, I would like to respond. Anyone has got it? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.